last couple of years haven't been the easiest for you. And I get emotional just thinking about it because I remember the day that you announced to the world that you were diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah.
These last couple of years have been different because here's big, strong youth pastor now all of a sudden leaning on the strength of those around you.
Yeah, it was different. For me, being the youth pastor, I'm the guy that helps everybody else with their stuff. You know, I go visit you when you're sick. I go encourage you when you're in a hard time, and suddenly it's me. I wasn't ready for that. I thought I was, but I wasn't. And when you hear a doctor say cancer, it's a scary word. But then when it's being said to you, you don't really even hear the word cancer. You just hear, "Hey, you're going to die."
Yeah.
And that's kind of just what I heard when he said it. And my doctor's a friend of mine, and normally he just calls me. Like he'll do a test and call me, "Hey, this is what you need to do, you know, this and this and this," or he'll text me or whatever. And so normally it's text messages when I find out my instructions for how I need to deal with something. But that day, I was at a funeral right after my doctor's visit, and I'm at the funeral. He says, "Mark, I need you to call me." And when I read that text, I was like, something's happening. This is about to happen. And I remember walking out into the lobby and trying to call him and couldn't get through. And I went back in and I waited again and I went back out and called. So there was this little moment of about 8 minutes that felt like about an hour, you know, as I'm waiting to get him on the phone. And he says, "Man, there's you know, they were just going in to check me out for reflux to figure out what my stomach issues were." And he said, "Man, there's a tumor in your kidney and it's about the size of your kidney. And there's a good chance that could be cancer, and that kidney's going to have to come out." And I'm standing in the parking lot. It's like I'm talking about somebody else's life, you know, but it was me. So it was definitely something to try to get my head around.
How hard was it for you coming to grips with the diagnosis?
I think the very first thing that popped in my head when he said it was, how am I going to tell the kids? How are we going to get the kids through this? I just thought, maybe if I could just get this surgery and be done with this really fast.
Keep it
Nobody
secret.
would even have to know. Just keep it quiet, you know. And Melanie said, "You know, this is kind of why the church is the church. You really kind of do need to let people pray for you." And
Reminds me of a song, maybe you've heard of it, "If We Are the Body."
If we are the body, yeah. Yeah, and so what I really realized was it was pride. You know, I've always talked to my teenagers a lot and dealt with the fact a lot that sometimes when you want to help somebody who's in a hard time, we're scared that we don't know what to say. So we will avoid them because we don't know how to fix it. But I'd never been on this side of it where I realized sometimes when you're hurting, you don't want to hurt around people because you don't want to feel it, and that's pride. And when we let the body of Christ be the body of Christ and love you where you are and just, you know, be around you, that's how God comforts us, through each other.
"Oh My Soul" is a song on this new record that really is a story of how God walked you through this battle with cancer.
Yeah, one of my favorite scriptures is where David says, "Why so downcast, O my soul? Put your hope in God." And it's basically David talking to himself. And I identify with David in a lot of ways. He was, you know, courage, but then he'd fall on his face, and he was real about it. That's how he prayed. If he was mad, he prayed mad. If he was confused, he prayed confused. He didn't add anything to it, just talked about life like it was when he was talking to God. And that's how I've always prayed. And in that moment in his life, he was talking to his own soul. He's like, "What's your problem? Hey man, pull it together. You know what's true. You know God's got you. Why aren't you letting your feelings run away with you like this? Go back to what you know. You said all this stuff. You wrote all this stuff. You believed all this stuff. It's still real. Even though it's happening to you now, it's still real." And that struggle is what was going in my head, because there were feelings going crazy. But my feelings, as crazy as they got, they kept slamming up against something solid in me, and it was the roots of my faith. And there's a point where your feelings, the things that you feel and fear, has to face the God that you know. And in a storm, you've got to go with what you know more than what you feel. And I remember going into the office that night after everything was over, nobody was around, and going to the office is kind of where I go to be alone sometimes, and sitting down at the keyboard, and the very first thing that came out of my mouth was, "Oh my soul, why are you weary?" And that's where that song started. And you hear in that song the battle going on literally. At one point, you hear this conversation going back and forth. And I think that's where we all live.
Can you share the chorus with us?
The chorus of the song, to me, a lot of times when a song is inspired by a moment, it'll evolve as you go. But this one really didn't. It really is kind of what it was when it came out. And it's, "Oh my soul, you're not alone. There's a place where fear has to face the God you know. One more day, he'll make a way. You can lay this down. He'll show you how." And it's just knowing one day at a time, I can follow him through a dark place. And he's going to be on the other side of it.
When the bottom falls out. What do you do when you're faced with something that really is so terrible that you didn't see coming and had no clue that it was going to happen? You've heard about it happening to other people, but when it comes and visits your home, what do you do? Would it cause you to pause and to question, where's God in this? Is God really real? If you've been following Jesus for any length of time, then you understand that following him is not an easy thing. That living a life of obedience to God is not a cakewalk, even when things are going as they should. Even when the sun is shining, even when life is perfect, even when the kids are doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's not easy to live a life of obedience to God when the sun is shining. But it's especially difficult when life is hard and when pain is real. So how are you doing at that? How are you doing at following God? How are you doing when the heat is on? Does your faith stand firm? Many of you know my friend Paul Schreiber. He's been here to visit a time or two. He was my college roommate in Bible college. He was the best man at my wedding. Just a great guy. Don't tell him I said that. A few years back, he lost his dad to cancer, lung cancer. Paul's dad died on his birthday. On the day of the funeral, his mom suffered a massive seizure that sent her to the hospital. 3 days after the funeral, Paul's mom receives a letter in the mail from the IRS saying that she owed $8,000 in back taxes. And during that week, I received a text message from Paul. Keep in mind, Paul was raised in a Christian home, went to Bible college, did everything he was supposed to do, faithful to God, served in this church. And he just says, does God hate us or what? And maybe you felt that way. What do you do when one in 1,000 different ways, things that were going well, all of a sudden aren't? And now the heat is on. And everything that you've been taught about God from the time that you were small is now rolling back in your mind as questions. And that brings us to Daniel chapter 3. The title of this morning's sermon is No Matter What. No matter what. And that's my prayer for you this morning. That's my hope for you this morning. That as you face difficulties, and I don't know what they are for you because we all face different difficulties, but as you face difficulties, as you face that thing that is painful, that's hard, that's difficult, that no matter what, you're going to choose to follow God. Daniel chapter 3 is a familiar story to those of us who've grown up in the church, but it's important that as we revisit that here this morning, that we not dismiss this as a children's tale. This is a real-life event that took place, and the heat was on, literally, for 3 friends. But they stood firm for the Lord. So today I'm going to tell you the story. We're going to go through Daniel chapter 3. And the first half of the sermon is simply going to be me telling you the story. And the second half of the sermon is going to be me trying to apply and draw some truth out from this story that happened 2,700 years ago to your life today. All right, so let's jump into the story. Daniel chapter 3. And as you read Daniel chapter 3, there's really 6 pictures that we find throughout Daniel chapter 3. And the first picture that we come face to face with immediately is the picture of a golden image. In verses 1 through 7, as you read Daniel chapter 3, you discover that Nebuchadnezzar is king, and he's an arrogant king. He's powerful. He has successfully made the nation of Babylon the most powerful nation, the most feared nation on the planet at that time. And what does he do to celebrate his greatness? What does he do to celebrate his achievements? Well, he decides to make a huge image of gold for the people to worship. Some scholars have suggested that the image of gold that he made for people to bow down to was an image of himself. The statue was 90 feet tall. 90 feet. Think about how it would take to make that. They didn't have cranes back then. Didn't have any electrical or power tools of any kind. 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. And did you notice that he set it up on the plain of Dura? Why did he do that? Because the plain was flat. And so what he wanted is he wanted everybody who would come to Babylon, the first thing they would see from a distance would be this huge statue shooting up off of the horizon for people to take notice of. And verse 2 details who the king wanted there for the dedication of this image. He wanted all the bigwigs. Everybody who mattered was to be there. And at the dedication of this graven image, this idol, the rules will be made very clear. Verse 4. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of all the instruments playing, you are to fall down and you are to worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire." More than likely, this furnace that they're talking about was the very furnace that was used to melt all the gold and to fashion this idol that was made. And verse 7 repeats the instruments that were to be used. And so he's making it very clear. This is a well thought out plan. These are the people that are supposed to be here. And these are the instruments that I want used. And this is the song that they're supposed to play. It was very precise how it was all supposed to happen. So that's the first picture, a golden image. Here's the second picture out of Daniel chapter 3. It's a picture of tattletale troublemakers. Nobody likes a tattletale, right? If you grew up with siblings, the worst thing ever was being ratted out by your sibling, right? Well, in Daniel chapter 3, starting in verse 8, there was just some tattletale troublemakers, just trying to stir the pot, make trouble. It reads, "For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews." Little history lesson, if you go back and you read Daniel chapter 1, you will read that Daniel and his 3 friends had been promoted above all the Chaldeans, that is, the magicians. Now, how do you think that went over? Like a lead balloon. And so ever since the Chaldeans were overlooked for this promotion, they were kind of looking for an opportunity to get these 4 guys into trouble: Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo. And verse 8 says, "For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. They responded and they said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, 'O king, live forever.'" They're a bunch of suck-ups is what they are. "You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of all these types of instruments should fall down and worship this golden image. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire." Well, you remember those Jews that you promoted? Look at verse 12. They're kind of bringing it up kind of nonchalantly to the king. You know those guys who you thought deserved a promotion ahead of us, who you thought were so much better than us, those Jews whom you have appointed over the administrations of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo? These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up. And so now we come to the king's response, and this is the third picture located in Daniel chapter 3. And what does the king do? He gets red-faced, and he gets angry. It's what he always does. He loses it. Let's read now verses 13 through 15. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a rage and anger, gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now if you are ready, at the moment that you hear the sound of the instruments and all kinds of music, to fall down and worship the image that I've made, well then very well, we'll forget the past. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. What God is there, then, who can deliver you out of my hands?" Did he really just ask that question? Because he's about to find out. And what's amazing to me with King Nebuchadnezzar is that he seems to be short of memory. If you read back in Daniel chapter 2, remember Nebuchadnezzar was king. And that was the story of Daniel, who also refused to worship the way that he was told to worship. Daniel chose to remain loyal to the one true God by praying to him and him only. And the king didn't like it back in Daniel chapter 2 when this happened, and so he throws him into the lion's den. And do you remember how that whole thing played out? They come back, the king comes back, check on him the next morning, and he's amazed to find that Daniel's still alive. These lions haven't torn him to pieces. And in that moment, remember King Nebuchadnezzar's response? "Daniel, that is so wonderful. We're going to worship and serve your God, because obviously he has rescued you." My, oh my, how quickly things change. Because now he's like, hey, this is what's going to happen. You're going to worship this God. And what God can there possibly be who can save you from my hand? He's a little bit of a slow learner. And so the threat has been made. And what's the response? What's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego going to do? What would be your response in that moment? Well, that leads us to the fourth picture, and it's a beautiful picture. It's a picture of unwavering character. I love their response, and my prayer would be, Lord, give me the courage that if I were ever faced with something like this, that this would be my response. I got to read it for you. Verses 16 through 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter." Have they lost their minds? This is King Nebuchadnezzar. This is the conqueror, the warrior, the type A personality. This is the guy whose number one threat and punishment all throughout the book of Daniel is, if people don't do what I want them to do, I'm going to tear them limb from limb, and I'm going to turn their houses into piles of rubble. That was his number one threat. And these three friends are saying, we don't need to give you an answer concerning this matter. Man, the Bible's awesome. Verse 17, this is their response continuing. "If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up." That's a picture of integrity. Integrity is when your actions match your beliefs. When your walk matches your talk. And here, the rubber meets the road, and they are standing firm, and this is what I believe. They have unwavering character. They have fantastic integrity. Here's the fifth picture of Daniel chapter 3. It's a picture of the fiery furnace. So Nebuchadnezzar keeps good on his word. He gets angry, he explodes in rage, and he demands that his orders are to be followed. Only, he gives new orders. He orders that this furnace be heated 7 times hotter than normal. He's a little bit upset. Verses 19 through 23 record how this is all taking place. And if you read verse 20, Nebuchadnezzar commands like the army rangers type soldiers from his own command, these big tough guys, to go take Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, tie them up, take them to the furnace, throw them into the furnace. And did you notice in verse 22 that this furnace was so hot that it killed those who were in charge of throwing Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace? Verse 23 is amazing. "But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up." And so now we come to the last picture of our story. It's picture number 6. It's a picture of a powerful God. Look at verses 24 through 30 of Daniel chapter 3. "Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded, and he stood up in haste, and he said, didn't we throw 3 men into the fiery furnace? And the suck-ups all reply, certainly, O king, you're always right. Look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm, and the appearance of the 4th man is like that of the son of the gods. So just a couple of things we need to talk about in these verses. First of all, do you see the miracles? There's 3 of them. And so they're tossed into this furnace, and I picture one of the guys being like, hey, we're not tied up anymore. And then one of them being like, hey, we're not dead. And then the third one being like, hey, we're not alone. Daniel? Well, it wasn't Daniel. But I think we need to spend a little bit of time talking about who this was just for a moment. Look at verse 25 again. Nebuchadnezzar said, look, I see 4 men loosed and walking around in the midst of the fire without harm, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Son of the gods. Let's talk about that just for a moment. That's what you'd expect to hear from Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, the Bible is only recording what Nebuchadnezzar said. So it's not necessarily accurate what Nebuchadnezzar thought. What is true is that he said it. And so Nebuchadnezzar, you got to keep in mind, is polytheistic. He believes in many gods. And so as he's seeing this 4th figure in the fire, he is of course not going to say, hey, look, it's Jesus. Because he believes in many gods. And so who is this that was in the fire with these 3? There's 2 major views on this. Some say that it was an angel, and that's quite possible, that God would have sent an angel to protect Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo. But I believe that this, in this second option, the second theory that is out there is that this is the pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. That this is Jesus Christ, who's always existed, who's always been a part of the Trinity, and he's not a created being, he's always existed. And so Jesus himself, I believe, came to be in the midst of this fiery furnace and minister to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo. Verse 26. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of the blazing fire, and he responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo came out of the midst of the fire, and all of the bigwigs who were there saw it in regard to these men, that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was the hair on their heads singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had even the smell of fire come upon them. And to think that God himself was present right there in the middle of the fire, that's amazing to me. Well, let's finish out the story. Verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's commands, and yielded up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo, here comes his threat that he's always used to giving, shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to rubbish heaps, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. Then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo to prosper in the province of Babylon. Side note, who was it that caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo to prosper in Babylon? It was a king, but it was the King of Kings. That was God's reward for their faithful obedience to him. All right, so we've told the story. Let's now get into the application. How does this story apply to you where you're at right now here in 2017? 5 lessons of application. We're going to quickly go through these. Here's the first lesson of application we get from the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo. The first is this: if your faith is real, then your future's certain. And I don't want to skip over this point. I want you to spend some time rereading that phrase. I want you to spend some time letting it encourage you. If your faith is real, your future is certain. It doesn't matter what circumstance you find yourself in, because you know what's going to happen an eternity from now. And that makes all the difference in the world. It really and truly does. But here's the thing. Not everyone's faith is real. But if your faith and trust in God is real, if you've accepted God's grace through faith by being immersed, if you are living out that faith in your everyday life, then your future's certain, and you can know where you will spend eternity. You have this hope. But sadly, not everyone's faith is real. I mean, there is no other record of any other Jew who were taken captive from Jerusalem, now living in Babylon, except for these four: Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo. So everyone's faith is not real. Some people's faith is just a show, to look good in the community, make it look good on a resume, whatever the case may be. And so this morning, the first question you must answer is your faith real? And you'll know when it's real. How will you know when it's real? Because when following Christ all of a sudden becomes difficult, or you're faced with something hard, that's when your faith is put to the test. And if your circumstances don't change your faith, then you know it's real. Here's the second thing, second lesson that we learn. When the heat is on, your character comes out. When the pressure's on, you see quickly what kind of person you really are. And if you don't believe me, hit your thumb with a hammer. That will determine pretty quickly what kind of person you are. Because what's on the inside all of a sudden comes on the outside. Anyone can follow Christ. Anyone can trust God when things are going good. But when what's supposed to be up gets turned down, that's when what really is on the inside comes out. And so these three, if there was any doubt in anyone's mind about whether or not their faith was genuine, let it be known these three friends had a genuine faith. When the heat is on, your character comes out. Trials come in seasons. They come in waves. And some of you are in a season of trial or difficulty right here in this moment. And I wonder how you and I would react if we were in a trial or a situation, or if somebody was threatening to do us harm because of our faith. I wonder if when the music first played, if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo stood there all by themselves while everyone else bowed down, and they sit there and they're looking around and like, hey, weren't there a lot more people in our small group who said they were never going to bow down? Weren't there people in our Sunday school class who committed to doing this? And where are they now? When the heat is on, your character comes out. Here's the third lesson we learned from Daniel chapter 3, and it's an important lesson, and it's not a fun one, but it's an important one. Yes, God is able, but he's not obligated. Yes, God is able, but he's not obligated, so please make note of that. And please don't develop any wrong expectations in regards to how God works. Yes, he is able, but he's not obligated. And there's a lot of confusion on this matter. Well, why? If he's able, why wouldn't he? I want to go back and I want to read verses 16 through 18 of Daniel chapter 3, and I want you to pay attention to it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hands, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up. Even if. Can you say the same? So many people wonder, well, if God can do anything, if he's all-powerful, well, why didn't he heal my spouse? Or why doesn't he change my boss's attitude toward me? Or why did he let my child die? Doesn't he care? Listen, he cares. He's powerful. He's loving. But just because God is able doesn't mean he's obligated. And here's what I learned from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo, and it's so important. And maybe your life is just fine and dandy and you haven't gone through any trials. Listen, you will. You will face a furnace one day, and it's going to be hot. And write down this truth for that day. Sometimes God's will might be different than our will. That was the truth that they recognized. They recognized that God's will is different than their will. How many would agree that these three did not want to go to the fiery furnace? But they recognized that God's will might be different than their own. And God might not be ready to spare them some unpleasantness. He might have a different purpose for you. And these three were willing to go with God's purpose. They were like, you know what? We just want to tell you something right now. Our God can take care of this for us, but even if he doesn't, we're not bowing down to your stupid idols. It doesn't change who God is. It doesn't change anything about his love or his power or his character. And so this morning, just want to remind you that God is able, but he's not obligated. And your situation does not change who God is. So how about you? Could it be that God's will might be different than your own? Yes, he can, but he might not. And either way, they did not make their own obedience conditional upon what they wanted out of life. And I've met so many people who do. Well, I'll believe in God, but first he's got to do some things for me. I'll follow God, but I want to see this and this and this take place in my life. And if he doesn't fulfill or come through for me in that way, sorry, you're out of luck, God. And so again, does this describe you? Here's the fourth lesson we learn from Daniel chapter 3. Stand up for God, and God will stand up for you. Believe it or not, God wants what is best for you and for me, but God also knows everything. Okay? We're operating on a very limited amount of information, you and I, but God sees the big picture. He sees it all. And going back to our story this morning in Daniel chapter 3, here's the question that I've oftentimes wondered. God knew the ending of this story. He knew that he was going to rescue them from King Nebuchadnezzar's hands, right? He knew that he was going to spare them from being consumed in the furnace. So why in the world did God let them go through this whole stressful situation of being thrown into the furnace? I mean, imagine how that must have been for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo. We know how the story ends, but they didn't. They said straight up, God might not choose to save us. So imagine the horror of being tied up. Imagine what was going through their minds as they were being led up to the top of the furnace. Imagine what they were thinking as the other guys are dropping dead around them and they're getting pushed into the furnace. A lot of emotional stress for people that God was going to deliver anyway. So why did he allow them to go through all of that? Two reasons. And I think this will help you in your situation as to why God sometimes allows bad things to happen to good people. First of all, by delaying deliverance, the impact upon those who were observing was greater. So who was in the audience watching this unfold? King Nebuchadnezzar was there. All of the other Jews who bowed down, the compromising Jews, were there watching this. All the government officials were there. And so by delaying deliverance, greater glory went to God. And some of you are at a place right now in your life and you're wondering to yourself, why isn't this thing over yet? It's painful. And one of the reasons that it's not over is because God is going to get a little greater glory for himself. And he's going to do some teaching in your life. And you're going to get some understanding out of this situation. And you're going to see God work in ways that you wouldn't otherwise see him work if he would have just fixed the problem instantly. But here's a second reason why God allowed these three friends to be tossed into the furnace. Because God allowed these three to be tossed, because God allowed the three friends to be delivered from a greater trial, the impact upon them was greater. It affected them more. Looking back, how many of us can agree that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo's confidence, their faith in God was greater because of what happened in the fiery furnace? Do you think they would have had that much of an impact or that greater of an impact on themselves if God would have just changed Nebuchadnezzar's heart before they even got in the furnace? If God would have just softened them, let's just forget the whole bowing down thing. You don't have to bow down. You guys can serve and worship. Okay, thanks. Would the impact in their own life have been as great as it was had they not gone through the fiery furnace? No. Because looking back over the rest of their life, as they're living life looking back on past events, they would be constantly reminded of the time that God showed up in the furnace. He was there. He was present. He was with them. Their faith in God would be made greater. And all of these years later, we are looking back and we are reading this story and we are being reminded that God is powerful, that he's great, and that he's mighty to save. That's how God's ways are so wise. That's how God's ways are so perfect. But in the midst of it, we're like, okay, God, if you could just turn down the fiery furnace in my life just a little bit. And God's like, no, not yet. Not now. I've got a plan. I've got a reason this is happening. And so when God delays, it doesn't mean that God doesn't love us or that he's not powerful enough to meet our needs. There is comfort in my heart in knowing that he's present with us through the fire. And so I wrote this last thing down, and it's not easy to hear, and it certainly isn't easy to live out. But here's the last lesson we learned through this ordeal. Give it all or don't give at all. God wants nothing less than 100% commitment from you. He's not interested in a one-day-a-week sort of Christian following. He's not interested in sometimes or when it's convenient, God. God wants your all-the-time commitment. I mean, look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo. These guys were sold out to the one true God. They put all of their eggs in the same basket known as God. There was no plan B. It was all or nothing. And this is the kind of life that pleases God. That's the kind of life that brings him glory. That's the kind of life that speaks loudly. A complete and total offering. A life that declares not only by action, but by words and by thought, God, I'm 100% yours. Do with me what you will. Give it all or don't give at all. So this morning we have learned some tough but important lessons about the fiery furnace. From that difficult ordeal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nigo, of what they were facing. And the question that we have is, what furnace are you facing in your life in this moment? Are you experiencing some sort of extreme pressure? Is your faith in danger of collapsing? Is it clinging on by a thread? This morning, the challenge and the decision time is, you know what? For you to make the decision that, God, I'm going to follow you no matter what. That this thing in my life does not change who you are and what you said. Your promises are true. And so no matter what, God, I'm going to be faithful to you. To further understand what God's desire is for you in your situation as you face this difficult thing, Revelation chapter 3, verse 16, as God is closing the oracles of his book, this is what he says in Revelation 3:16. I wish you were hot or I wish you were cold, but you're just somewhere in the middle. And for that reason, I spit you out of my mouth. Whatever you're facing in life, may you have the courage and the faithfulness to declare, Jesus saves. And maybe this morning, you just simply needed to hear that reminder. Maybe just simply being told and being reminded, you know, God, there is a God. He is faithful. He's on his throne, and he's powerful, and he sees what's going on in your life, and he's aware of it. And one day, the wrong will be made right, and we look forward to that day. Maybe that's what you need to be reminded of this morning.